Empire of Pain: The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty, by Patrick Radden Keefe. Introduction. Picture this. A bright, cold morning in the spring of 2019. We're in a sleek, black skyscraper in the heart of Midtown Manhattan. Inside, on one of the top floors, is the law firm DeBois in Plimpton, a place where immense power operates in quiet, carpeted hallways. In one of the fishbowl conference rooms, a small army of lawyers, more than 40 of them, are assembled. They represent a reclusive, billionaire family. Across the table sits a woman in her early 70s, a medical doctor named Kathy Sackler. She's impatient, guarded. She's here to be questioned in a deposition, something her lawyers fought hard to prevent. The man asking the questions, Paul Hanley, looks her in the eye and tries to distill an epic human tragedy down to a single point. He's trying to find the taproot. Because by 2019, America was deep in the grips of an opioid epidemic. Hundreds of thousands of people had died from overdoses. It was a crisis that seemed to come out of nowhere, and Hanley, along with thousands of other lawyers, believed it all started with a single drug, introduced by a single company, owned by a single family. That family was the Sacklers. If you knew their name at all, you knew it from the shining brass plaques in the world's most prestigious museums and universities. The Sackler Wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Sackler Museum at Harvard. The Sackler Library at Oxford. They were modern-day Medicis, celebrated patrons of the arts and sciences. Their name was a symbol of generosity, culture, and high society. But behind that glittering name was a secret. The Sacklers owned a private pharmaceutical company called Purdue Pharma. And in 1996, Purdue released a revolutionary painkiller called OxyContin. It would go on to generate over $35 billion in revenue, making the Sacklers one of the richest families in the world. It would also become the taproot of the deadliest drug crisis in American history. Patrick Radden Keefe's masterpiece, Empire of Pain, is the secret history of this family. It's a sweeping, multi-generational saga about the quest for a good name, the corrosive nature of greed, and the price of impunity. It has sold millions of copies and won prestigious awards, not just because it's a feat of investigative journalism, but because it tells a story that is so deeply, tragically human. Today, we're going to unravel that story. We will trace the Sackler dynasty from its humble immigrant beginnings in Brooklyn to the highest echelons of global power. And I promise you, by the end of our time together, you will understand not only how this crisis began, but you will also gain a profound lesson about the difference between reputation and character, and how a family's obsession with their name ultimately led to its ruin. This is a story you won't forget. Book summary. Our story begins not in a boardroom, but in a small grocery store in Brooklyn in the early 1900s. The patriarchs of this story are three brothers, Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond Sackler. They were the sons of Isaac and Sophie, Jewish immigrants who came to America with nothing but an intense hunger for a better life. Their father, Isaac, descended from a long line of rabbis, had a deep sense of pride. He ran the grocery store, Sackler Brothers, and reminded his sons of the one true inheritance he could give them. It wasn't money. It was, he told them, a good name. The driving force in the family was the eldest son, Arthur Sackler. Born in 1913, Arthur was a phenomenon, a whirlwind of ambition and energy from the very beginning. He was brilliant, charismatic, and possessed a seemingly inexhaustible drive. While still a teenager during the Great Depression, he worked a dozen hustles, selling advertising, running a photography business, not just to support himself, but to support his parents and pay for his younger brother's education. His mother, Sophie, had one dream for her boys. She wanted them to be doctors. To her, medicine was a noble calling, a way to serve humanity and achieve respectability and financial security. All three brothers became doctors. But Arthur was different. While in medical school, he took a part-time job as a copywriter for a pharmaceutical company. And he discovered he had a rare and powerful talent. He was a genius at selling things. Especially drugs. In the 1940s and 50s, the world of medicine was changing. This was the era of miracle drugs like penicillin. But marketing these ethical drugs, medicines prescribed by a doctor, was a sleepy, conservative business. The advertisements were bland and technical. Arthur Sackler saw an opportunity to change everything. He took over a small medical advertising agency called William Douglas McAdams and applied the same flashy, psychological techniques used to sell cars and cigarettes to the world of pharmaceuticals. He understood something profound about doctors. They were influenced not just by science, but by their peers, by authority, and by the subtle art of persuasion. Arthur created campaigns that looked like serious medical education but were, in reality, sophisticated advertising. He pioneered the use of celebrity doctor endorsements, placing ads in prestigious medical journals that featured respected physicians vouching for a new drug. He funded scientific studies that, surprise, surprise, showed his clients' drugs in the best possible light. He helped build the army of detail men, the polished sales reps who visit doctors' offices, buy them lunch, and leave behind glossy brochures. His first massive success came with a new class of drugs, minor tranquilizers. You've probably heard of them, Librium and its even more famous successor, Valium. Working for the drug company Roche, Arthur's agency marketed these pills not for severe mental illness, but for the everyday anxieties of modern life. They pitched them to women, specifically, the stressed housewife, the anxious college student. The ads promised a cure for psychic tension. The campaigns were wildly successful. Valium became the most prescribed drug in America, the first drug in history to top $100 million in sales. It made Arthur Sackler a very, very rich man. And it taught him a crucial lesson. The biggest profits weren't in treating the sickest patients, but in convincing healthy people that they needed a pill for the mild and common ailments of life. But even as the money poured in, there were troubling signs. Patients were becoming dependent on Valium. They were suffering from withdrawal. But Arthur and the drug companies had a ready-made answer, an argument that would become the family's mantra for decades to come. It wasn't the drug's fault. The problem, they insisted, was the user. Some people just had addictive personalities. While Arthur was building his advertising empire, he never forgot his family. In 1952, he bought a small, struggling patent medicine company for his younger brothers, Mortimer and Raymond. It was a humble business, known for products like an earwax remover and a laxative called Senecot. The company had a sturdy, respectable name, Purdue Pharma. Arthur remained a silent partner, but he had given his brothers the vessel for their own dynasty. For decades, they ran it as a modest, profitable business. Mortimer, the more flamboyant of the two, expanded their operations overseas, while Raymond, the quiet, steady one, managed things at home. And here we come to the pivot point of the entire story. By the late 1980s, Purdue had a successful product called OxyContin. It was a morphine pill with a special time-release coating, the Contin system, that was designed to treat the severe pain of cancer patients. It was a good drug that helped many people in their final days. But it had a problem, at least from a business perspective. The patent was set to expire. Soon, generic companies would flood the market, and the profits would dry up. The family faced a choice. They needed a new blockbuster drug to replace OxyContin. This is where the second generation comes into focus, particularly Raymond's son, Richard Sackler. Richard was, in many ways, the opposite of his uncle Arthur. Where Arthur was charming and worldly, Richard was brusque, awkward, and relentlessly driven. He had been groomed to take over the family business. He became obsessed with finding a successor to OxyContin. The family decided to apply their contin time-release technology to a different opioid, OxyContin. OxyContin was a powerful and well-known narcotic, a chemical cousin of heroin. But it had a key marketing advantage. In the public mind, the word morphine was scary. It meant cancer. It meant the end of life. But OxyContin didn't have that same stigma. Most doctors knew it only as the mild ingredient in combination pills like Percocet. They perceived it as weaker than morphine. This was a critical misunderstanding. In reality, OxyContin is about twice as potent as morphine. Internal documents from Purdue, unearthed years later, show that the company knew about this misperception among doctors. And they made a fateful decision. They would not correct it. They would exploit it. They would market their new pill, which they named OxyContin, as a gentle, safe starting point for pain relief. It was the painkiller to start with and to stay with. They would expand its use far beyond the limited market of cancer patients and push it for all sorts of common, chronic pain, back pain, arthritis, fibromyalgia. To do this, they needed to overcome the biggest obstacle, the widespread fear among doctors of prescribing strong opioids for long-term use because of the risk of addiction. This fear was something the medical community called opiophobia. So, the Sacklers and Purdue launched one of the most aggressive and deceptive marketing campaigns in pharmaceutical history. It was Arthur Sackler's playbook, amplified to a terrifying new level. Richard Sackler himself kicked off the campaign at a lavish launch party for the sales team in 1996. He promised them that the launch of OxyContin would be followed by a blizzard of prescriptions that will bury the competition. Purdue more than doubled its sales force, sending an army of young, attractive, and highly motivated reps across the country. They were trained to downplay the risk of addiction. Their central talking point was a single, dangerously misleading sentence that the company had managed to get approved by the FDA and inserted into the drug's official label: delayed absorption, as provided by OxyContin tablets, is believed to reduce the abuse liability of the drug. From this single unproven belief, Purdue spun a myth. They told doctors that because of the time-release formula, the risk of addiction was less than 1%. This statistic was based on a flimsy, 5-sentence letter to the editor of a medical journal that had nothing to do with long-term opioid use for chronic pain. But it sounded scientific. It sounded authoritative. And the sales reps repeated it like a mantra. They targeted doctors who were not pain specialists, general practitioners who treated a wide variety of patients and had little training in addiction. Using sophisticated data mining, they identified the doctors in every territory who were the biggest prescribers of opioids and focused their sales efforts on them. The reps referred to these high-volume prescribers as whales. Purdue created a vast ecosystem of influence. They funded an array of supposedly independent nonprofits and patient advocacy groups, like the American Pain Society, which then promoted the widespread use of opioids. They established a speakers bureau and paid thousands of doctors to travel the country, giving presentations that echoed Purdue's marketing messages. They sponsored all expenses-paid pain management seminars in luxurious resort locations like Florida and Arizona. They gave away coupons for a free 30-day supply of OxyContin, getting tens of thousands of patients started on the drug. They produced promotional videos with titles like "I Got My Life Back," featuring patients testifying to the miracle of OxyContin. The message was always the same: pain was an undertreated epidemic, and OxyContin was the safe, effective, and non-addictive solution. It worked beyond their wildest dreams. Prescriptions skyrocketed. In its first year, OxyContin brought in $44 million. By 2000, just 4 years later, it hit $1 billion in sales. the Sacklers had their blockbuster. But almost immediately, there were signs that something was terribly wrong. In rural areas, particularly in Appalachia, Maine, and the Rust Belt, the very places Purdue had targeted most aggressively, a strange new drug culture was emerging. People had discovered that if you crushed an OxyContin pill, you could bypass the time-release mechanism and get a massive, heroin-like rush of pure oxycodone. The pills, known on the street as hillbilly heroin, began to be abused, diverted, and sold on the black market. Pharmacy robberies spiked. And people started to die. The company knew. From almost the very beginning, Purdue's own sales reps were filing reports about street value, about people crushing and snorting the pills. One rep wrote to headquarters that many doctors now thought of OxyContin as the street drug all the drug addicts are seeking. But instead of pulling back, Purdue doubled down. The company's public stance, orchestrated by Richard Sackler, was one of aggressive denial. The problem wasn't the drug, it was the people abusing it. He ordered his team to hammer on the abusers in every way possible. He called them the culprits and reckless criminals. This became the company's central defense, a narrative that sharply divided the world into two camps: legitimate pain patients, who never got addicted, and reckless abusers, who were responsible for their own demise. Any evidence that blurred this line? The countless patients who started taking the drug exactly as their doctor prescribed, only to find themselves hopelessly dependent, was ignored or denied. The company also knew another dangerous secret. Their claim that the drug provided a steady 12 hours of pain relief was not true for many patients. Internal studies showed that for a significant number of people, the drug wore off after only 8 hours. This meant that patients would experience excruciating withdrawal symptoms before they were due for their next dose. This cycle of pain and relief, the very peaks and troughs the company claimed to have eliminated, is a classic recipe for addiction. When doctors started prescribing the drug on an 8-hour schedule to compensate, Purdue did nothing to discourage it. More frequent doses meant more pills sold. In 2001, the U.S. Attorney in Maine issued a public warning to doctors about the widespread abuse and diversion of OxyContin. The story was finally breaking into the national news. But Purdue's response was to fight back with an army of lawyers and PR firms. 3 of the company's top executives, Michael Friedman, Howard Udall, and Paul Goldenheim, became the public face of the company, touring the country, meeting with concerned officials, and testifying before Congress. Under oath, they lied. They claimed the company had no idea about any significant abuse of OxyContin before the year 2000, despite mountains of internal evidence to the contrary. For a time, this strategy of denial and deflection worked. But in the Western District of Virginia, a pair of determined federal prosecutors, Rick Mountcastle and Randy Romsire, decided to open a criminal investigation into Purdue Pharma. For 4 years, they built a case, poring over millions of pages of internal documents. They found overwhelming evidence that the company had intentionally misled doctors and regulators about the addictiveness and abuse potential of OxyContin. They prepared to bring felony charges not just against the company, but against the 3 executives who had lied. This was the moment of greatest peril for the Sacklers. If those executives faced serious prison time, they might be pressured to flip and testify against the family members who had directed their actions. But the Sacklers deployed their most potent weapon, their wealth and influence. They hired a team of high-powered lawyers, including former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani and former U.S. Attorney Mary Jo White. These lawyers went over the heads of the Virginia prosecutors and appealed directly to senior political appointees at the Department of Justice in Washington. The deal was cut behind closed doors. The felony charges against the executives were dropped. Instead, they would be allowed to plead guilty to a single misdemeanor charge of misbranding. No one would go to jail. In 2007, Purdue Pharma, the company, pleaded guilty to a felony charge of criminally misbranding OxyContin. It agreed to pay a fine of over $600 million. It was a massive sum, but for a company that was now making over $1 billion a year from OxyContin, it was just the cost of doing business. And in a brilliant legal maneuver, the entity that actually pleaded guilty was Purdue Frederick, the old, original company. Purdue Pharma, the cash cow, was left with a clean slate. Crucially, not a single member of the Sackler family was charged. Their names did not appear in the court documents. In the press coverage, they were barely mentioned. The three executives had, as one person inside the company put it, taken the fall for the family. The Sacklers were safe. And far from being chastened, they saw the outcome as a victory. The company continued to market OxyContin aggressively, and the family continued to pay themselves hundreds of millions of dollars a year from its profits. Between 2008 and 2017, they pulled over $10 billion out of the company, transferring much of it to offshore trusts and shell corporations. But the world outside was changing. The crisis they had helped create was spiraling out of control. And a new kind of reckoning was coming, one they couldn't control with lawyers or money. It started with an artist. Nan Goldin, a celebrated photographer, had nearly died from an OxyContin overdose in 2017. When she got out of rehab, she was filled with a righteous fury. She had seen her friends die during the AIDS epidemic, and she recognized the same pattern of deadly indifference from those in power. She knew the Sackler name from the museums she frequented. She decided to make it her mission to expose the connection between the family's blood money and the art world they used to launder their reputation. She founded an activist group called Pain, Prescription Addiction Intervention Now. They began staging dramatic die-ins at museums with Sackler-funded wings. They showed up at the Guggenheim, showering the rotunda with thousands of fake prescriptions. They unfurled banners at the Met in the Sackler wing, in front of the Temple of Dender, chanting Temple of Greed. Goldin's protests were a work of performance art, and they were impossible to ignore. For the first time, the Sackler name itself became toxic. One by one, the world's most prestigious cultural institutions, the Tate in London, the Guggenheim, the Louvre, and finally, the Met, announced they would no longer accept donations from the family. The name that Isaac Sackler had prized above all else was now synonymous with shame. At the same time, a new wave of litigation was building. Led by state attorneys general like Maura Healey of Massachusetts, thousands of lawsuits were filed against Purdue, and, this time, against individual members of the Sackler family themselves. Healey's lawsuit, made public in 2019, was a bombshell. It was filled with the family's own emails and documents, laying bare their direct, hands-on management of the company and their callous disregard for the consequences of their actions. The empire was crumbling. Facing a tidal wave of lawsuits and a ruined reputation, the Sacklers did what they had always done. They tried to buy their way out. They pushed Purdue Pharma into bankruptcy in September 2019. This move immediately froze all the lawsuits against the company. Then, they offered a settlement. They would give up ownership of Purdue, turning it into a public trust, and contribute several $1 billion, generated from the sale of their overseas drug companies, to help abate the opioid crisis. But their offer came with one non-negotiable condition. In exchange, the family members themselves would have to be granted full, permanent immunity from all current and future civil lawsuits related to OxyContin. They would never have to admit wrongdoing. For many of the victims and the state prosecutors, it was an outrageous proposal. The Sacklers had siphoned billions out of the company, leaving behind a bankrupt shell, and now they wanted to use the bankruptcy court to shield their personal fortunes and escape accountability forever. As the book Empire of Pain concludes, the final chapter of this story is still being written in a bankruptcy court in New York. But the story of the Sackler Dynasty is a powerful, modern-day tragedy. It's a story about a family that lost its way, a company that put profits above all else, and a country that paid a terrible price. It reveals how easily the institutions we trust, from government regulators to our most revered cultural establishments, can be corrupted by the allure of money. And at its heart, it's a profound meditation on the meaning of a name. For 3 generations, the Sacklers worked tirelessly to etch their name in stone on the walls of museums and universities, hoping to secure a legacy of greatness. But a legacy isn't what you buy. It's what you build. And the name they built will forever be associated not with generosity, but with an empire of pain. Commentary. As we step back from this incredible story, it's hard not to feel a sense of profound sadness and anger. Patrick Radden Keefe has given us more than just an account of a corporate scandal. He's painted a portrait of a moral catastrophe. What strikes me most deeply is the central irony that runs through the entire book, the story of a family that was so obsessed with their name, yet so utterly blind to the true nature of their legacy. Isaac Sackler, the immigrant grocer, told his sons that a good name was the most valuable thing he could give them. And for a time, they seemed to believe it. Arthur Sackler, for all his ruthless ambition, was driven by a desire for recognition, for respect, for a place in history. He plastered the family name on buildings as a way to achieve a kind of immortality. But the story shows us that a name, like money, is a tool. It can be used to build, or it can be used to hide. For the Sacklers, it became a shield, a beautiful facade to conceal the ugly source of their wealth. This book is a powerful lesson in accountability. The Sacklers operated for decades with a sense of impunity, believing that their wealth, their lawyers, and their philanthropic halo made them untouchable. They deflected blame, silenced critics, and co-opted the very institutions that were supposed to hold them in check. The story of Purdue's relationship with the FDA, of former government officials becoming paid consultants, is a chilling reminder of how easily power can be corrupted. But what makes this story so compelling, and so important for a young person to understand, is that it's not just about a few evil people. It's about a system. It's about a culture that so often celebrates wealth without questioning its origins. For years, the world's most elite museums and universities were happy to take Sackler money, to lend their prestige to the family name, and to look the other way. They were, in their own way, complicit. This book forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the institutions we admire and the price of their silence. So, what can we take away from this? First, learn to look behind the name on the building. Question where wealth and power come from. Be skeptical of those who wrap themselves in the flag of philanthropy while refusing to answer for their actions. True character isn't measured by the size of your donations, but by the integrity of your conduct when no one is watching. Second, understand the power of a single, determined voice. For years, the Sacklers seemed invincible. But then a handful of journalists, prosecutors, and activists like Nan Goldin refused to back down. They told the truth, even when it was difficult, and they changed the story. It's a powerful reminder that one person, armed with the truth, can make a difference. And finally, think about the legacy you want to build. The Sacklers wanted to be remembered like the Carnegies or the Rockefellers, titans who left their mark on the world. But their story is a cautionary tale. A legacy isn't just about what you leave behind, it's about how you live. It's about the choices you make every day, the values you uphold, and the impact you have on the people around you. That was a summary of Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe. We've touched on the major beats of this incredible saga today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary can only ever be a map. The real journey happens when you travel the terrain yourself. The true power of this book is in the details, the voices, the scenes, the mountain of evidence that Keefe has so brilliantly assembled. This summary is here to help you decide if this story is one you need to explore more deeply. If any part of this family's rise and fall has captured your imagination or stirred something within you, I urge you to pick up a copy. Reading it is more than just learning history. It's an experience that will change how you think about wealth, power, and the stories we tell ourselves. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that these deep dives are making an impact, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another one of the transformative books on the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.